Hi there, here's a short topic video on the labour market asking the question, what is full employment? Well, the answer is that there's no universally agreed definition. So there are different interpretations of the idea. Well, a couple of standard definitions. Firstly, one is that full employment is achieved when there is an absence of demand deficient unemployment. In other words, when cyclical unemployment has disappeared from the economy and all that's left is basically frictional plus some structural unemployment in the labour market. Another definition of full employment is when the number of vacancies registered equals the number of people actively seeking work. A slightly more technical definition is something called the NAIRU. We have a separate topic video for the NAIRU. And this is the non-inflation accelerating rate of unemployment, or put in plain English, the level of unemployment that's judged to be consistent with relatively stable inflation at or around, for example, the UK's 2% inflation target. Put another way, can we get unemployment down to a level where inflation is still relatively stable, but much lower than unemployment much lower than it is today? And George Osborne came out in 2014 with quite an ambitious target. He said he wanted to achieve full employment, but his definition of full employment was based on employment, not unemployment. To quote, he wanted more people working in Britain than any of the other countries in the G7 group. And then this bit, the best place in the world to create a job, to get a job, to keep a job, to be helped to look for another job if you lose one. What on earth that means, I do not have a single clue. David Cameron, Prime Minister for the moment, also committed the Conservative Party to full employment, focusing on employment, aiming for Britain to have the highest percentage of people in work of any developed nation. Wow, that's not the same as G7. Well, let's look at the data. The data for UK is quite promising at the moment. This is the unemployment rate, and it's the percentage of the labour force who are out of a job, but who have been actively seeking work within the last month and available to start paid work within the next 2 weeks. It's the unemployment rate. Can you see that the peak of unemployment in each of the last 3 recessions has fallen? The last recession, the peak was just over 8%. And unemployment has fallen quite sharply since. It's now hovering around 5.1, 5.2% of the labour force. And this is why people are asking the question, how much further can unemployment fall? Can we reach full employment? Well, if we look at the number of vacancies, there are about 750,000 vacancies in the UK labour market. That's up from a year or so ago, a couple of years back, about 750,000. Keep in mind there's about 1.6 million people officially unemployed. So we have 2.5 unemployed people per job vacancy. So according to that measure of full employment, the UK economy is a long way off and actually would never reach full employment using that measure. And the other aspect to bear in mind is that lots of people who are out of work but not counted as unemployed. In this country, in the UK, we have nearly 8.5 million people who are categorised as economically inactive. Now, over 2/3 of them do not want a job according to the surveys. They're people who are full-time students, they're people who are looking after a family, raising a family, looking after an elderly relative perhaps, or somebody who's looking after somebody else with a chronic illness. They could be people who are long-term sick and therefore effectively outside the labour market for the moment. Some people who've taken early retirement, etc. But looking at the right-hand side here, we still have 2.2 million people who are economically inactive at the moment, not counted as unemployed. They're not in work, but they are not part of the official unemployment statistics. That's important. Now, would if we get unemployment down to 4%, would that count as full employment? Could we celebrate achieving full employment? It would certainly take unemployment down to the lowest level since the early 70s, perhaps even lower than the late 60s. This would be the lowest unemployment rate, certainly over the last 40 years, perhaps getting close to the last half century. So by modern standards, getting unemployment down to 4% would be full employment. But, and here's where you can really start to evaluate, 4% unemployment tends to hide certain things. First of all, we don't know how much hidden unemployment there is, particularly amongst the economically inactive, as I've just said. We also know that although unemployment's been going up, underemployment in the economy has been going up as well. We'll come back to that in a second. It's not just how many people are in work. If you're going to measure the employment rate, it's the quality of jobs that matters. To what extent do people feel secure in their job? And are they sufficiently well paid in their job? In other words, the number of people who are in a job have a paid employment but are still at risk of poverty. Not just the level of unemployment, but the duration of unemployment. So, for example, how long people have been out of work for. The long-term unemployed have been out of work for at least a year. And of course, for people doubting we can even get to close to 4% unemployment. A lot of economists thinking that unemployment will kind of flatline or plateau somewhere around the 5% mark. Many businesses are sceptical of Conservative government's full employment ambitions. They think already there are many industries where skill shortages are becoming critical, and therefore wage inflation may start to accelerate well before the 4% unemployment rate is reached. Now here's an interesting chart to finish with from the House of Commons blog in March 2015, and it's really quite useful, this chart, because they're taking various measures and definitions of full employment for the UK, and they're taking a long timeline from 1970 through to 2014. The bits in green correspond with meeting the certain criteria for full employment. The bits in grey, no, we're not at full employment. Britain has never had the highest employment rate amongst G7 nations, ever. We've never had employment rate above 80% of the labour force. We've only periodically had an employment rate of more than 75% of people of aged 25 to 64. We've never had a situation where the number of unemployed equal the number of vacant jobs. Only rarely have we had the lowest G7 unemployment rate. As you can see, unemployment of less than 5% is a rarity. And using the technical definition of unemployment at a level consistent with stable inflation, well, we've had that more often. But as you'll see in a separate topic video, the NAIRU changes over time because the nature of the labour market fluctuates and changes as the pattern of jobs evolves over time. So what do I take from this chart? Full employment is unusual. Some people are getting a little bit excited about reaching full employment. The reality, I think, is that our labour market has some structural weaknesses, some structural rigidities. There's lots of disincentives in the mobilities of labour, which will probably hold back further falls in unemployment over the next year or two. Expect to see the rate of unemployment essentially flatline at or around 5%. Getting it down to 4% is pretty hard. What is full employment? Full employment is hard to achieve. Thank you.